This is Jack Stanley, and I wanted to talk about minstrel recordings and minstrels in general. We hear all about, minstrel records, and today we look at them with with a disparaging look because they're rather offensive to today's world. But we have to remember that the minstrel performance was perhaps the most popular thing around in the 19th century. I will tell you this, before I show you some of these minstrel records, that in the 1850s, when we opened up diplomatic relations with Japan, which incidentally was a series of gunboats went over with Admiral Perry, and they said basically do business with it or we're going to start shooting. I mean, it's not very, very friendly, not very nice, but that's the way they kind of did things then. Once they established that the Japanese would meet with them, the first thing that the United States Navy did for the Japanese was to put on a minstrel show, to show the high art of the United States. The sailors, I should say, probably some soldiers as well, put on blackface and performed for the Japanese. They drew pictures of it. It's rather bizarre to see. So today, it's really something we don't want to see. But there's a very important thing about history. You have to preserve your history. It's really important. And so I wanted to share some of these things with you. As I said, the minstrels were very, very popular, and you'll find them all over the place. I want to show you some examples of some of the records. I've been putting some on here, and like this is an improved record with the minstrels. It's very early. It still has the sticker on the back for a Consolidated Talking Machine Company. But what is neat about this, of course, is go all the way back to the dawn of recorded sound, and you'll have the minstrels. Columbia, Edison, Berliner, all did it. Another 7-inch of the Georgia minstrels, which was an early form. Actually, this is a recording made in 1900. Just a late pressing of it, saying Victor record. It's probably right around 1905 pressing of a 1900 record. Very late. We also had lots of other albums and records that came out, and I tried to share some with you. I put them on. This is a neat recording. This is the Georgia Minstrels. This is the early edition. This is the 10-inch. I have to tell you, they did 10-inch. They did 12-inch. They did all kinds of recordings here, and they're all quite fascinating. They also did a 12-inch, and this is, of course, An Evening with the Minstrels. And, of course, An Evening with the Minstrels was very, very popular. It was a series that started in 1902, and they did 8 recordings. And the 8 recordings would be performed in a row. I just recently put this on YouTube so you could hear the whole series from one end to the other. I tried to use as many of the originals. Now, this is one of the originals from the 1902 series. Okay. And this was all done in December of 1902. So they came out at the end of December, probably for the Christmas season, and the beginnings of 1903. And they were very popular, but they didn't last long as a record because, as we all know, you could only get one stamper from that record, those pre-matrix recordings. And so once that stamper wore out, they had to make new recordings. Like this is an example of a 1904 recording of An Evening with the Minstrels. Well, we can tell it's 1904 by the matrix number, which is 1022, which tells me it's 1904. And very important. Now let me get others here. I tried to grab a little bit of everything here to share it with you. This is a Columbia matrix recording, and what's really neat, it's actually a climax, and it's the Old Kentucky Home Minstrels, number 805, which it's announced as a climax minstrel. Let's see, what else do we have here? Lots of other different types of records. Here, let me grab another one here for you. Oh, let's see, what have we here? I'm trying to put all of these on because there's so many fascinating minstrel recordings. You know, of course, the Zonophone Company had their own set of minstrels as well. These were the Rambler minstrels. And later with Columbia, they had the Rambler Minstrel Company. They also had a lot of other minstrel companies on Victor and Edison. And this is an early Columbia. Now, what is interesting about this one is number 800. It doesn't announce it as a Columbia record, so most probably it was recorded as a climax, maybe not released. It's an interesting thing about a lot of the climax recordings. They recorded a lot, but they didn't release all they recorded. And many of these would work their way out to becoming Columbia, so it gets a little confusing at times. And I imagine they were thinking along those lines, because in some cases you'll notice a lot of times in the announcement it doesn't mention what company it is. And perhaps maybe there's a reason for it. Maybe the recording artist who often made the recording and made the announcement wasn't quite sure who he was recording for. Got to remember, Climax and Zonophone were being recorded in the same place for a while, and eventually Climax was bye-bye and Columbia came in. But you were already making Columbia cylinders at that time, which makes things very confusing. So I just wanted to share some of these with you so you could see some different types of labels of Climax, Victor, Columbia, Zonophone, and the like, minstrels. Remember, the minstrel was the most popular thing in the world. Today we look at it with offense. And I'm not condoning these recordings. I'm not saying that they're great. Today they're kind of problematic. But it is important to preserve the history. No matter what that history is, it should be preserved. We will never see minstrels again. But it's fascinating to think of the fact that in the 19th century, it was the greatest form, most popular form of entertainment. And even more so, many of the companies, especially Edison, I recall, had to make public announcements for being months behind in the manufacture of records, cylinders in those days, because of the massive demand for coon songs and minstrel recordings. And that most probably was true of others, but especially for Edison, they were sometimes about 3 months behind in orders because of the great and massive demand for those records. So I hope you enjoy these records I've tried to share with you. I'll let you hear a little bit of history. I went with that series that was put out in 1902 called An Evening with the Minstrels and put them in order, 1 through 8. Therefore, you can hear the whole show. I did add a few that replace some of the originals because in many cases the copies, which are the same performance, sounded better. So I tried to give the best performance possible by sharing the best recordings. So, a little story on minstrels, and I hope you enjoy. Thank you very much.